Previously, I briefly mentioned variables, so let's go over them a little bit more. Basically, a variable changes, and when you use a variable in programming, you use it to store some sort of data, so numbers, strings, booleans, stuff like that. Now you can set a variable one time and leave it alone, or you can set a variable multiple times, so it could be constant within your program, but it could also be changing. It depends on what you decide to do. Now the way that you program a variable differs a little bit from language to language, and they don't start with something in them. They start with nothing. Actually, they don't exist at the start. You have to define the variable yourself, and you have to put something in there. Now how you do that varies a little bit from language to language. In Python, it's just a variable. You program it the same regardless. However, in some languages like Java, whether you want your variable to hold a byte, or a short, or an int, or a long, or a float, or a double, or a char, or a string, you have to actually tell Java, or some of the other more traditional languages, what that variable is going to hold, and then it's like typecast. It's stuck in that type, and if you try to put something else into that same variable, it will get angry, your program will break. Not true in Python. In Python, it's just a variable, and you can change types, you can keep the same, it doesn't matter, but you just have one way and you don't declare what type it is. So I'll show how to do that in just a moment. Now it's important when you're naming a variable that you actually use a name that means something. If you make your variable name like G, like what does that mean? Another programmer's not going to know what is supposed to go into G, and if you haven't looked at your program in a while and you're revisiting it after a few months, you might forget as well. Is there a guinea pig in that variable? Or you might be surprised to find a giraffe or something else, right? So what you put in there is up to you, and it's important that you put a descriptive name, so that way when you come back at it, when someone else is looking at your programming, if someone else ends up taking over your project or working on your project with you, they actually know what's supposed to go in there. Let's quickly look at how to define a variable in Python. I'm just going to open text edit. I'm just going to make a new Python file. It's really easy to do. It takes like 2 seconds. That's it. I just defined a variable, and I put a string in there. If I want to instead put in an integer, and I know we haven't talked much about data types yet, but we'll get into them later. There. I just made a variable that holds an integer. If I want to change what's in the first variable that I made, make that an integer as well. There, I just changed it. So if I put in some print commands, it'll print hi the first time because that's what the variable was. Once it's reassigned here, it will print out 5 instead. And if we want to, we can even use input. So the input command that we used previously, this is how we can actually use it with the variable. So we can store whatever the user wanted to type in. And we can print it again and we'll see what happens. Now there are a few reserved names that you should avoid when you're making your variables, just because they're words that Python already uses in the programming language. So if we save this, I'm just going to call it var.py, and I'll just leave it on the desktop. And then I can launch terminal and run it. So cd desktop to go to the desktop, Python 3, and var.py. So we have hi, we have my random number, we have this top variable reassigned again, and then what do we want to put in the variable? We'll just put a char, just a single character, so just put p. And now that same variable that was hi, that then became 3, is now p. So those are variables, and we can do a lot with variables, and we will start using variables a lot. So just a quick short video to explain sort of what they are and how to create them.